700 wives and 300 concubines. Okay? This man had 1,000 women in his life routinely. And you know what God had told this really wise man? He said, if you do this, they will what? Turn your hearts away from me. But Solomon did it anyways. He's got all this wisdom, and he does it anyways. I like to say, some of you may remember that song, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. That was Solomon. His whole entire life, he is looking for answers. He is looking for happiness in all the wrong places. And this was even when he knew God. This was even when he was God's king over God's people. He knew all this stuff, but he still went looking for answers in all of the wrong places. Now, let me ask you to do something. It's pretty much the only passage I'm going to have you turn to all afternoon. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And when you get there, I want you to give consideration to something. This particular book is written by Solomon. He refers to himself in the book as the preacher. And he uses third person. So that would be like me coming up here and saying, Kevin is now opening up his Bible, and Kevin is now about to read to you from the Bible, and you need to pay attention to Kevin as Kevin's... That's kind of silly sounding, isn't it? Well, he refers to himself as the preacher. The preacher taught these things. The preacher sought these things. The preacher said this, and God said that. So he refers to himself as the preacher. He also uses another word an awful lot. Who knows the word that Solomon uses in the book of Ecclesiastes probably more than any other? You got it. Vanity. Somebody want to tell me what vanity is? There's no profit in it. It's something that is worthless. So if I say that is vanity, I'm saying it's worthless. If I say that is vanity of vanities, it's the worthlessness of worthlessness. It just really no value whatsoever. I want you to consider what Solomon said at the end of his life. I want you to look at chapter 12, and I want you to look at the last two verses. Solomon says, as an older man, he says, the conclusion when all has been heard is this: fear God and keep His commandments. Because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it be good or evil. Now, we all go to Bible class on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights, and we go to worship on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and things like that. And we hear things like we need to listen to God and we need to obey God and we're going to give an account of God. But here's the problem, young people. The problem is youth. Now, you may not think that's a problem. I don't think it's a problem in a lot of ways. But remember what we're talking about in this youth rally, things that we would tell our younger selves. You know what I would tell my younger self? You're going to get older. You're going to get older. And things are going to start happening to you. Your hair's going to fall out. It's going to migrate down here and to other places. You know, some people, when they get older, when they blow their nose to sneeze, party favors come out their ears because they got hair growing here they never thought of before, okay? And so things get different. New things become older. Older things don't work as well as they did when they're newer. And it's kind of interesting that Solomon, with all of his money, his power, his influence, and even his wisdom, it took him all the way to the end of his life to finally figure it out. I'm going to die. He's going to say in one of the verses we're going to read in just a minute, the dirt or the dust will return to the earth, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. All of us are going to die. Unless Jesus comes back first, there's going to be a point where all of us are going to die. Now, here's the problem with youth. Everybody hearing me? How many of you expect to die tomorrow? How many of you expect to die next week? You see, when we're young, we know that we're going to probably live to 70, 80, 90, maybe 100. We had one gentleman who just went to his grandmother's funeral. She was 102 years old. I have a friend of mine whose grandmother is still living. She's 106. Wow! But you know what? Most people, even today, don't live to be 100. And you know what happened the last time I had a birthday? Despite how amazingly youthful I am, I turned 50. Do you know what I did to my mama when she turned 50? I said, Mama, you're not 50. I said, Mom, you're a half a century. It just sounded worse. Don't ever say that to me, okay? It sounds worse now that I'm there. Do you realize what I realize is that I probably now have more life behind me than I have in front of me? I probably won't live to be 100 necessarily. I could, but my parents, still alive, but are starting to have some poor health. They're in their 80s, early 80s. I never had a grandparent to live into the 90s. So even with all of the advances in modern medicine, I probably won't make it to 100. And things are going to get progressively more difficult for me as I approach old age. And this is what's interesting. This wise King Solomon, who went looking for all the answers in all the wrong places, finally said this. He says, you know what? I need young people everywhere to know some things. I want you to understand what's about to happen to you physically. Because this body at some point in time is just going to go away. And all that is going to be left is the spirit that God gave you. So how are you going to prepare? Well, you first of all have to acknowledge that you're not going to live forever. Even if it's a long way away. And I hope you all have a long, happy life. But even if it's a long way away, it's going to come. What happens in the meantime? Especially if we put all of our emphasis on the flesh. If we put all of our emphasis on life. If we, like Solomon, go looking for all the answers in all the wrong places, are we going to ultimately have time to conclude what he concluded? And that is, we're here for a reason, to fear God and keep his commandments. So I want you to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 12. I want you to start up with verse 1 with me. Ecclesiastes chapter 12. We're going to take a look at verse 1, and we're going to continue on. Notice what Solomon writes. He says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near when you will say, I have no delight in them. Guys, answer me a question. Why would Solomon say when you get older, you will have years where there's no delight? Because I figure when you get older, you got more money, you got your house paid off, you got your cars paid off, maybe you get to go on trips to islands in the Caribbean. You know, I couldn't do that when I was 6, at least not by myself. So what does he mean? What kind of days are evil that lie ahead of me? Anyone? Help me out. Maybe your ability to enjoy them is diminished. You know, in Barbados, on the northern side of the island, we went around some cliffs. See, on the southern side, they've got sandy beaches, really nice. But they've got cliffs on the northern side. You know, sometimes when you're older, your balance is not quite as good. You want to be careful hanging out around cliffs when your balance isn't good. Maybe they got a lot of rocks and coral and things like that. And that's something, when I was a kid, maybe I'd jump around on it. I still try to jump around and act like it. But you know what I did the other day? Right in front of my wife. I jumped down on a little piece of what I thought was some smooth rock. And boy, it was just covered with moss. And there went my feet, and here went my backside. Bonk, right in front of my wife. Here I am trying to impress my wife, and I ended up on the ground. Maybe that wouldn't have happened when I was a little younger. Who knows? But things start to change. Listen to what he continues to say. He says, do these things before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and clouds return after the rain. Now, there's a lot of people who talk about what do these things mean, but sometimes when we're young, the world is just a bright and shining place. It's just filled with amazing things. And if you ever get to see something through the eyes of a child, meaning if you ever really get to enjoy it like they're enjoying it, it's a real treat. It's like when they're opening up a present. Some of us have had so many presents, 50 years worth of presents. How old are you again? You're way young. But 50 years worth of presents. Presents are a nice thing, but they're not that big a deal. But think about a little kid on Christmas morning. Comes down the stairs, runs over to the tree. There's presents everywhere. And so help me, you don't see little kids going, now I'm going to take the present and open it carefully so that I can reuse the paper next year. Okay? That's my mother. That's not any kid ever anywhere. They're like ripping paper, bows flying and stuff like this. They're excited about it. But there's going to come a time when life's not as exciting. What happens after a rain? You're looking for sunshine. But what happens after a rain if more clouds roll in? That's kind of depressing, isn't it? And it's usually, as we talked about one of the questions that came in earlier, sometimes it's when we're older that we face things that are depressing to us and that get us down, not so much when we're little kids, because when we're little kids, we're bright-eyed optimists. And we see the world and its wonder as just this amazing place that we get to live in. Look at verse 3. We need to make sure that we remember our Creator in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. Now, as we go in verse 3 and the following verses, this is where we're going to go try to figure out a little bit of a mystery. How many of you like a riddle? How many of you like a mystery where you go and you try to figure out what's going on so you can arrive at the answer? This is what people have been doing for centuries with Ecclesiastes chapter 12. What they're figuring is that Solomon kind of uses this poetic language to try to get people to pay attention. It's kind of like Shakespeare. 400 years ago, Shakespeare is writing a bunch of stuff, and I remember somebody said, well, why didn't he just say it like we say it? Well, because he said it 400 years ago. They had a different way of talking back then, and he also had a very eloquent way of talking. That's kind of what Solomon does here. Solomon creates this picture. And a lot of people believe that what he's talking about is our bodies. And he's saying, remember your Creator in the days of your youth before this happens. And if we peer through the veil of the mystery, we start to realize maybe he's talking about some parts of our bodies. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to really help me out here. Pay attention to what's going on, starting in verse 3. Okay? Here's what he says. He says, we need to remember the Creator in the day that the watchmen of the house tremble. Now remember, don't go doing Google searches. And adults, don't jump in too quickly. I want to have the kids help me with this. Who are the watchmen of the house that might tremble? What is the watchman? Yes, ma'am. Adults, good answer. Now, once I get one or two answers, y'all be able to hone in on this a little bit quicker, but that's good. Who would the watchman of the house be? Let's talk about this. What does a watchman do? He watches over, okay? Now, what does a guarded watchman do? In other words, somebody who has weapons. What's he do? Huh? He protects. How does he protect? Lock him up. Well, he may use weapons. He may use a gun. He may use a sword. He may use something else. But what he does is he protects things from getting in. All right? So, come here, Dindy. Because I'm pretty sure, based on his lesson this morning, I did not grow up in the neighborhood he's growing up in, okay? All right? Because he's going looking for a fight. I'm the one that was running away from guys like him, okay? All right? I was a little bit of a wimp when I was growing up, okay? Now, assuming that Terrence Brownlow Dindy is afraid of me, big assumption, okay? All right? And I come back, and I come after him, and I'm about to hit him, what's he going to do? How did he just protect himself? With what? His hands. Thank you, sir. Now, notice what Solomon says here. Solomon says there's going to come a time when the watchman of the house, the things that protect us, maybe that's our hands. Maybe that's our arms. You know, if somebody throws something at you, you knock it away. If somebody comes after you, a bee comes after you, you swat that way, or in my case, once again, you run away. But whatever, the hands protect us. Okay? So that being in mind, he says there's going to be a day when the watchmen of the house tremble. Young people, have you ever seen somebody who's older where their hands shake? From Parkinson's or other situations, other diseases, other signs of just old age. It's hard for them to sign their name anymore. We have a lady in Sebring who has both Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. So it's very hard for her to write her name anymore. It's very hard for her to talk anymore because her body shakes. She has to be careful when she walks. And so he says, there's going to come a time. Now look at your hand right now. Stick it out there. Stick it out there. Is it still? Yeah, the old people. I don't want to stick it out there. Young people, can you hold it still? Can you hold it still? Yeah, see, there may be a day when you can't do that. Look at the next thing he says. He says, and mighty men stoop. Okay, what do you think Solomon's talking about here? He just got through talking about the hands, which are pretty important. There's something else that's pretty important in our bodies. What are they? What? What are they that might cause you to stoop? Yeah. What? Knees or your legs. Okay, once again, when you stoop, if I'm up here and I stoop down, I'm going down purposely, willingly, things like this. But there might come a time where I have to go down to the ground because I can't anymore. My dad has these little tiny strokes now and again. And when he feels one coming on, he just goes down to the floor because he knows he's going to fall eventually, so he tries to control it. Sometimes people get just tired and they can't get to where they need to be, and their legs go out from under them. He says, remember Jesus before those kinds of things happen. I want you to look at the next illustration that we're looking at. Somehow or another, my Bible turned off there. Take a look at verse 3. He says, also be aware when the grinding ones stand idle because they are few. Young people, help me with this one. What are the grinding ones that are sometimes few? Yes, ma'am. Your teeth. Good job. Because, hey, what do you grind your food with? Your teeth. And what happens when you're like Debbie Hayes and you want to grind your food? Guess what? Some of you have these nice, pretty teeth. Some of you have braces, helping them being even more beautiful. Sometimes you can go to the dentist and have whitening on your teeth. And then what happens when you don't have any teeth? Kind of hard to chew your food without teeth, isn't it? Kind of hard to grind your teeth when you don't have teeth, or you have less of them. He says there's going to come a day when maybe that might be your problem. How about this one? Those who look through the window grow dim. Yes, sir. Eyes. Good job. Now, guys, do me a favor, okay? Remember how young I am? Remember that? How many of you have ever heard of cataract surgery? Who gets cataract surgery? Old people. Thank you, Mr. Tagtoe. Old people. I mean, these are people who are nearly dead. They get cataract surgery and they wheel them into the other room and measure them for the casket. Okay? I've already had double cataract surgery. I had a rare condition that my mom had, and not just a little over, about a year and a half ago, I had double cataract surgery because one Sunday morning, my brother, who is an eye surgeon, had told me I had cataracts in both of my eyes. And what that is it's kind of like a fog that kind of comes in and slowly it comes in, and over several years, it just kind of turns things from cloudy to dark. But I woke up one Sunday morning and I was blind in my left eye. I couldn't see. I mean, I may as well have gotten up there, and you may not have noticed it, but I was preaching like this basically. So I was using one eye, and I had to use one eye for several more months until I could get the surgery. And during that time, the cataract in this eye, I'm hoping it doesn't make me totally blind. It's kind of scary. And so as that cataract starts going, how many of you know about fonts? F-O-N-T-S, on paper. What is a font normally on a piece of paper that's printed out on your computer? Somebody want to tell me? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, give me one that's kind of normal. Let me give the size. I'm sorry, the character size. 12. 12 is pretty normal. Do you know what I was preaching out of before I went and had my surgery? What? 30. 30. I literally had to have I had like 25 pages of notes just to get through the scriptures in my sermon. And because I got one eye, and I'm like looking at the congregation in Sebring probably thought I was a really mean guy because I'm always looking at them like that, I'm just trying to see to read. Okay, look at the next one. Verse 4. It says, and the doors on the street are shut. What are the doors on the street that are shut, young people? I'm going to give you a hint. It goes along with the next phrase. As the sound of the grinding mill is low. Your ears. Okay? And some people don't want to think of their ears as doors. But what happens when you get older a lot of times? You don't hear as well. And see, my wife thinks that I don't already hear well. I hear really well, but like most men, I just choose not to hear certain things. Okay? But let me tell you, there's a time when you may not be able to hear things as well, and then suddenly the grinding mill, the noises of life, suddenly you don't hear them as much anymore. There's a gentleman who comes down and winters with us in Sebring, and he got to the point to where he not only had 90% hearing loss, he had almost 100% hearing loss before something happened. How many of you have seen or heard of a cochlear implant? That's those little things that some people you see, it's just kind of attached to the head, and there's a wire that goes into their head. They literally have a surgery that goes in and can help the hearing of some people. When you talk to him now, he hears every word you say. It's like a miracle for him because it's just amazing. Not actually a miracle, it's surgery. And it's something that God has given us the ability to figure out these kind of things. But it's an amazing thing. Well, he's in a situation like that. Take a look at the next passage, the next part of our passage. It says, one will arise at the sound of the bird. What does that have to do with old age? Well, let me ask you something. How many of you young people sleep really well? In other words, so well that, here, Hiram, come here. I'll use you for this example because I'm still afraid of Terrence. How many of you sleep like this? Hiram, pretend you're asleep. How many of you sleep like this? Hiram, wake up. I didn't tell you to wake up. Wake up, Hiram. Wake up, Hiram. Wake up, Hiram. And then it's finally, wake up, Hiram! Wake up! How many of your parents do that to you? Okay. There we go. I got a volunteer in the back. Got one right. It's a tag toe, no doubt. Okay. Guys, I used to sleep so well. Now, I got to tell you guys, I don't sleep very well. Sleep very well like I used to. Oh, I want to sleep like I used to. I used to go to bed at night and I'd wake up in the morning 37 hours later, and it was great. I wake up, guys, usually at least once an hour throughout the night. And that kind of stinks. Because if you can go right back to sleep, it's not so bad. But if you wake up, and you can't go back to sleep, it's a real pain because guess what? You still have to get rest, don't you? Your body still needs to go to sleep, right? Okay, so that's a problem. Well, what does it mean? It will arise at the sound of the bird. A lot of times, how many of you, your parents get up before you do? My mom and dad talk about getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Who gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning? You know, that's crazy. But they get up very early. Well, sometimes the older you get, the earlier you wake up. It's just how you do it. And maybe you'd like to rest a little bit more too, but your body just says, get up. So maybe you get up and you hear the songs of the birds, or it says, how about this? All the daughters of songs will sing softly. What does that have to do with old age? Anyone? Adults? Anyone? When the daughters of song sing softly. No, we're beyond the noise. Your bladder. Let me tell you something. Any bladder issues, I usually don't have a chorus of women outside singing. Okay. Softly and tenderly. No. There's a great flood coming. No, that's not it either, okay? Let me ask you this. Have you ever known someone who sang beautifully and then as time went on, they couldn't sing as much? They couldn't sing as loudly. They couldn't sing as high. They couldn't sing as low. In fact, some people I've seen, when it comes to singing, it's very hard for them to sing at all. Some people almost mouth the words to the song because their voice isn't strong anymore. That's maybe what that's talking about. Look at verse 5. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place. What does that mean? That's pretty simple. What is it? Afraid of heights. Now, a lot of people are afraid of heights, but more and more people, the older you get, are afraid of heights. Why? You're going to break something. You know what? When you're young and you break a bone, it's really not that big a deal because you get it fixed, it heals up, it's good to go. A few years ago, I was in an automobile accident. I have a scar right here on my arm where the bone broke. I have a little scar here where it broke in two and exited my skin. Kind of went like, and then came back in. I never saw it, okay? But they went in and fixed it up. I now have right here one adamantium plate. I'll have two more inserted in, and then I will be able to project all three Wolverine blades. No. But I do have a titanium plate in there that held everything together where it would grow. And as a result of that, even at my age, for the most part, my hands have worked just fine. Except, watch this. See how I can do that with my hand? I can bend my hand back almost in a U. Okay? That's as far back as I can bend this one. After the surgery and after all of the physical therapy, that's as far back as I can bend it. It doesn't work quite as much anymore. Well, I want you to look at the terminology that's used in that passage of Scripture. It talks about men are afraid of a high place. When we fall as little kids, we don't necessarily break everything. Our bones are pretty strong. Even as we get older and we fall, our bones don't break. But when you get really old, somebody falls. My mom fell a few weeks ago, broke her knee. Older people are always falling and breaking what? Their hip. And that's a terrible thing to break. Okay? My mom, just as soon as the knee heals up, what did she do 3 weeks ago? She fell and hurt her shoulder. She might have cracked it. Okay? And this is not working really well with a father who has Alzheimer's. Because 5 times every morning he says, what happened to your knee? So what happened to your shoulder? You know, and she has to answer him. So it's kind of tough. But guess what, guys? There's a time and a place where you're not going to want to get up anywhere high. You may not even want to walk up steps for fear that when you walk up, you fall and break something. Now, look at the next one. Look at the next one. He says they're also afraid of terrors on the road. Now, I don't think that Solomon was talking about driving cars. But having just come from Barbados, I know about terrors on the road. First of all, they all drive on the wrong side of the road. That's kind of scary. What are you doing on the left side? And secondly, they have these things called roundabouts that are just crazy in Barbados. As one lady told me, said the rule you need to remember is there are no rules. But terrors on the road are things out there, things away from the house. Sometimes the older they get, people are a little more comfortable just staying home because they're afraid of the things that are out there. What about this? The almond tree blossoms. What does that have to do with anything? What is almond trees blossoming? Adults, I jump in here if you know what that's called. Oh, Brian Kenyon's got it. Look at what Brian Kenyon's pointing at. He's pointing at that. What? What? What color? Look at Brian Kenyon. White. No, not the back part where there is none. We're not talking about the sandy beach here. We're talking about the trees along the edge, okay? So, white hair. Almond trees, when they are growing and they're getting ready to blossom, they're pink. But when they actually blossom, they turn white. And so it says, hey, your hair's, some of you are going to have hair that turns white, and some of you are going to be like me where it turns out. Okay? How about this one? The grasshopper drags himself along. What do grasshoppers do? But if you ever saw a grasshopper kind of dragging himself along, you'd know it was hurt or something, right? Something's not right. How fast can you run? How fast can you run when you're older? You know, some people, everybody listen to this. Listen real carefully. See if you can hear this all the way on the back row. Can you hear that? People dragging their feet. Have you ever seen somebody so old they just kind of drag along? The pep is out of their step. They're not jumping like they were. Look at this one. The caperberry is ineffective. In other words, things don't taste like they used to. A man goes to his eternal home. In other words, he dies while mourners go about the street. Now, this is just a truth, but the older you get, the more of your friends pass as well. Not only are you approaching death, but you seem to be surrounded by death because maybe your parents and your grandparents are gone. Maybe some of your brothers and sisters are gone. Maybe some of your friends you grew up with are gone. Some people live to be 100, 102, 106. They don't have any more of those friends they grew up with because death surrounds them. Look at verse 6. Remember him before the silver cord is broken. What's the silver cord? What is it, young people? What's the silver cord? Do you have any cords in your body? Thank you again, Mrs. Tagtoe, with the spinal cord. What happens when your spinal cord breaks? What happens when it gets messed up? What happens when your back goes out? Yeah, you have all kinds of problems. How many of you know who Don Blackwell is? Don Blackwell is a gospel preacher who a few months ago was in an accident and it broke his spine. Okay? He will, unless some kind of medical intervention comes along, he will never walk again. He can use his hands. He can still talk. He's already preaching again, but he's preaching from a wheelchair. Because when that spinal cord gets damaged or it's broken, then your ability to move lessens, if not altogether, is prevented. Well, he not only talks about the silver cord being broken, notice what else he says. He talks about verse 6, and the golden bowl is crushed. What's the golden bowl? Huh? You got it, my friend. The skull. You know, the part that houses the brain. That's kind of the golden center of the body. What happens if it's hurt? Or what happens if that mind starts to be lost? What happens when there's squirrels in the attic? Okay, but what happens when these things happen? You know, I told you about my dad. My dad has Alzheimer's, and if you sit down and talk to him, you can have a great conversation with him, but he doesn't remember that conversation 30 minutes from now. My wife's mother had something called dementia, and it was so severe that within 2 years, she went from thinking as an adult who was a nurse to thinking like a 4 or 5 year old child. And she eventually couldn't talk, couldn't communicate. Her mind slipped away before she passed. Look at the next thing that he says. The pitcher by the well is shattered. Oh, this one's going to be a little harder. What is the pitcher by the well? Anyone want to take a guess? I see some people pointing, but... Well, let's think about it for just a second. What's in a well? Water. So it's a liquid. What's in a pitcher? Water, a liquid, okay? Something that is liquid. Now, what is it in our body that's liquid and gets pumped from a source that we probably want to have? Blood. The heart pumping blood. A lot of people think that this is a reference to the heart. And once again, the older you get, what kind of problems do you have with your heart? Sometimes it doesn't beat right. Sometimes it's very irregular. Sometimes it can cause a heart attack and even die. Look at the next one that he mentions. He says, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. This is my problem. Some of you probably have this as well. I don't have any part of my body that's crushed. But in 2015, in August of 2015, when I took my son Connor to Freed-Hardeman University to go off to college, by the time I got back, every time I got up out of the car, I had a sharp pain that went down my leg. And it was not my sciatic, but I thought it was my sciatic because that's a big nerve that goes down your leg. The problem was in the L5 lumbar here. I had a herniated disc. It took me 4 or 5 months to figure that out. But that's where a piece inside your backbone, you got this little jelly. And when that jelly kind of gets squished too much and squirts out, that jelly then turns around and touches on a nerve. And so I had a herniated disc that caused me terrible pain. And sometimes if I'm not careful and I pick up something too big, then I can hurt it again because I'm squishing that herniated disc. Well, guess what? Your back doesn't work quite as well when you're older. My mom always told me, said, take care of your back. It's the only one you've got. Well, now I'm having, every once in a while, some back problems. Well, see, the reason that that's the wheel is because look at what you can do with that lower back in particular. That's the part of your body where you can pivot, where you can rotate. Well, he says this is a time where the cistern is crushed. Now look at what he says in verse 7. He says, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Now remember, we're trying to get to the point to where Solomon comes up with his conclusion, and he says, guys, when you're young, and your body works, and your brain works, and your eyes work, and your ears work, and your mouth works, and everything works, learn about God then, because it doesn't work as well later. You can't think as well later. You can't remember as well later. You might not be able to learn later. There is no later. You've got today. And unless Jesus comes back first, the very first thing that's going to happen is we're all going to die. And our bodies, they're just going to rot away. They're going to be put in the dirt. But our spirit will return to God. Well, if that's the case, then answer me this. Take a look at what he says next. Starting there in verse 8. He says, vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Remember, what does vanity mean? Worthless. Okay, no value. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Who's the preacher? Solomon. All is vanity. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered and searched out and arranged many proverbs, and the preacher sought to find delightful words and to write the words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and the masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writing of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearying to the body. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is what? Fear God and keep His commandments. Solomon had all the money anybody could ever want. He had all the servants doing all the work for him he could ever want. He had all the power. He had all the women he could ever want. He had everything that this life had to offer. And you know what he called everything in this life? He called that vanity. He said, you know what's the only thing in this life that is not vanity? listening to the words of God so that you can have a relationship with Him, so that when you die and your spirit returns to Him, it won't return to Him where He says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." It'll be that where you get to hear Him say, "Well done," what? "Good and faithful servant, enter into your reward." Guys, it's really hard. I got to tell you, it's really hard growing old. I don't want to grow old. I'm fighting it tooth and nail, left and right. I'm going snorkeling, I'm going diving, I'm doing all this stuff, but you know what I noticed? I really noticed when I went to Barbados this time? One fellow lost his glasses. Glenn Wilcutt, y'all can all hold this against him. Glenn Wilcutt lost his glasses in about 30 feet of water. I can free dive. I've free dove 30 feet of water in my lifetime, no problem. It was hard this time. Because not only are you going deep, you're going through several levels of compression. It was a little harder on me this time. I haven't ever noticed it before, but it was a little harder on me this time. I used to could hold my breath for a really long period of time. I think things like the pizza that I just ate prevent me from getting as big a breath of air as I used to. But I can't hold it quite as long anymore. I'm getting older. My body is not as new as it once was. It's gonna wear out. And young people, no matter how young you are, this is your destiny. Just remember that life is not about the flesh. Life, the reason we're here, is not about all the things that are around us and even the things that are in us. Our life is about our relationship with God and having the best relationship we can have so that when we return to Him, it will be a day that leads into an eternity of joy. So, young people, have fun while you're young. But remember your Creator while you're young. Get to know Him. Learn all about Him so that you can live your life for Him. Sound like a plan? Thank you guys for your time.